This has been a sad and hard week here at Church of St. John the Divine. In a few moments, we'll hear in the prayers of the people our intercessions for those who have died. Just a week ago today, we lost our brother in Christ, the Reverend Greg Buffone, as you know. Just a tremendous shock. We were literally a month away from celebrating on May the 28th his retirement. And just the epitome of what a good deacon should be, of servant leadership, of steadfastness in the faith. I know that he was a friend and a counselor to many of you, if not most of you here. And in my relatively brief term here so far, my affection and respect for Greg grew daily. We will miss him very much. Just as an additional personal aside, I was incredibly saddened by the passing of a new good friend, Andy Gilchrist, also last weekend. It was surprising and shocking in so many ways to me, and we will celebrate both of those lives and others in the coming days. So it was a sad and hard week here, and I'm really grateful for today. To be with you, to worship, to surround ourselves again with the promises of the gospel. So this in the life of the church, the fourth Sunday of Easter every year is euphemistically called Good Shepherd Sunday. Always hear portions of John chapter 10, you just heard, where Jesus self-identifies as the Good Shepherd who protects and gives life to his sheep. Jesus says in today's gospel, reading the early portions of that chapter, that his sheep hear his voice and follow him because they know him, they trust him. Later in the chapter, Jesus will say, I am the good shepherd. And the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And of course, Jesus knew exactly what he was doing, referring to himself metaphorically as the good shepherd. The shepherd imagery is a prominent motif in the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament. Shepherds, as you would know, are ubiquitous in the ancient Middle Eastern world. And in scriptures, they're representative of those who have been appointed by God to care for and to lead God's people. Shepherds are messengers, prominent image for the prophets. I think you see this especially in, say, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the prophet Zechariah. And think about this. Where was Moses and where was David when they were called into leadership for God's people? They were out shepherding their flocks. Jesus, again, knows exactly what he's doing, referring to himself in this way as the Good Shepherd. He is fulfilling the law given to Moses, and he is fulfilling the kingship promise of God upon the house of David in himself. And it is David on whom I want to focus mostly today, because in addition to having that passage from the 10th chapter of John, we heard again Psalm 23. Am I really going out on a limb if I say that Psalm 23 is the church's favorite psalm out of 150? I don't think so. But it has, down through the centuries, been the church's favorite, the one that Christians through the ages have most readily connected with and wanted to return to when times are sad or difficult. This is a psalm that actually tells the story of David's long and complicated life. It may be your life story as well. In some ways, it's my life story. So it's long been noted that Psalm 23 has the shape of a parabola. It's a U shape, goes from high to low, back to high, and this mirrors David's very long life. The psalm begins in praise on a high note. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. So David, you can imagine, as a young, confident shepherd. David is a young warrior. Sure, I'm willing to go out and battle Goliath. David is the young king who unites all the tribes of Israel. David is the anointed king on whom God sets his eternal promises, the Davidic covenant. Then we go down in the middle of the psalm to the lament. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. The low points of life. David, the adulterer. David, who witnesses the tribes descend into civil war. David, who witnesses his own children die and rebel against him. And then the psalm was most likely written at the very end of his life, where he has renewed strength and perspective despite his old age. Praise again. Surely your goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Again, I think this psalm with the scholars was written toward the very end of David's life, a life that had many twists and turns, great successes, terrible failures, extreme highs, grievous lows. And the question that the psalm invites of us is, can we trust the faithfulness of God, not just when we're on the mountaintop, when things are going well, but when we descend into the valleys, when we grieve, again, when life is hard and sad. Philip Keller was born to Christian missionary parents in East Africa, I believe it was 1920, in the country of Kenya. And Keller grew up around native sheep herders there, and later, as a young man, he himself took up a living as a sheep owner and a rancher. And he learned a lot about sheep and shepherding through that experience. In his devotional book on the 23rd Psalm is something of a 20th century Christian classic. Highly recommend it to you. A primary theme that runs through the entirety of his devotional book is that sheep, some of you may know this from experience, sheep more than any other livestock on earth require the most hard work, maintenance, and management. To be a very good shepherd requires immense dedication and loyalty to ensure a flourishing flock. So no wonder sheep are such an apt analogy in the Bible to people. Read the creation story of all the things that God created. Nothing demands more management and intense investment than people from our Creator. And so what Keller helps us, or helps me at least, to understand about Psalm 23 is that when we get to the bottom of the psalm, the low point in the parabola, when we get to, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, this is actually a reference by David to the summer season, when shepherds from the Middle East to Africa, to Australia, to other parts, even in the West, will lead their flocks up into the hills and the mountains to range and feed on remote alpine meadows, verdant pastures from our hymn we just sang. Beautiful, lush rangelands until the fall, when it starts to get colder again and they'll be led down for the winter. This is the time of year when the shepherd is alone with his sheep for weeks and weeks at a time. No one else to talk to but the sheep, I suppose. This is the time of year that David knew so very well from his own Middle Eastern forebears, from his family, from his own experience as a shepherd in the mountains and hills of Judea. This may have been where David was, by the way, when Samuel came to Bethlehem to anoint a new king and asked Jesse, you don't have any other sons? Doesn't seem like this is the one. Well, we've got one more, but he's out herding. Is that where he was? And David knew the trek with his flock up into the higher elevations in the summers was not without risks and dangers. There would be rock slides, flash floods, rampaging streams to cross, sleet storms, poisonous plants, and of course, predators poised to attack the sheep, which is how David got so good with a slingshot. And of course, the travel is up through the valleys. The sheep do not get airlifted up to these high range lands. Every mountain, as you know, has valleys and gulches, ravines and draws, and the best way up to the top is through these valleys. Mountain climbers would tell you that. Any shepherd worthy of the vocation leads his flock gently but persistently up through dark valleys. And here's the spiritual lesson that Keller learned and that David is making in the psalm. All sheep have to go through the valleys to progress to higher ground. The valley may be dark. The valley does not need to be a dead end. For one thing, the shepherd is with the sheep. They can see him, they can hear his voice. For another, the valleys, and Keller reminds me of this, are the well-watered way, the way where one finds freshwater streams and quiet pools for timid and erratic sheep to drink cool water and lie down in peace to rest. The valleys of life are the very places where we may, in spite of our grief and our sorrows and our disappointments and our questions, find refreshment for renewed strength and renewed faith and renewed growth. And it is a gift of grace. Grace alone. For it is a gift of refreshment from God in those times. So many occasions in my own pastoral ministry, and I know you've experienced this too, you've seen it, I've been so incredibly blessed to observe other people in the life of the church walking through the valley. And I'm thinking especially around people who are dealing with their own mortality, who are dying or experiencing the death of a loved one. And to witness in that the most profound strength and serenity and peace and assurance that, strange to say, almost borders on joy in the midst of grief. How is that? Well, it's not a matter of personal fortitude, willing it up. It's not a matter of developing special skills. It's simply a matter of faith, of a loving trust that God is with us. God has walked this valley himself. God has taken all of that on upon his suffering cross. And the other thing is that those are the very people who are best able to minister to me. And I thank you for that. I'm a beneficiary of that. I remember reading some years ago, a large non-denominational church outside of Chicago, you probably heard of it, Willow Creek. This may have been a decade or so ago, but the pastoral staff there was curious to know about the spiritual lives of its members, and they put out a survey. One of the questions on the survey to the congregation was, think of an era in your life when you grew spiritually. What contributed to that? When did you grow spiritually? What contributed to that? The number one answer from the congregation: pain. When people are engulfed in hurts and struggles and hard challenges, not always, but many times they grow spiritually. You've heard this so many times. Christians, we're not masochists. Pain and suffering are not good things in and of themselves. Heck no. But for mysterious reasons, pain and suffering can awaken us to the deepest questions of life. They can inspire us to look beyond ourselves. The definition of a valley is that we're hemmed in. We don't have good perspective when we're in the valley. And so we may look up and wonder, is there anything on the other side of these valley walls? And maybe God is there to meet us anew in that. So I was thinking about that survey question just this week and looking at my own life, and it is true for me. My eras, my seasons of greatest spiritual growth followed personal failure and embarrassment as a young adult, dealing with crises in the life of the church over my years of ordained ministry, grief in moving from one place you love to another place that you'll come to love, sorrows in my own life, people that I've loved and known, members of my own family who have died. I'm a better Christian for having lived through those things faithfully and wanting to grow from those things. Shadowed valleys, therefore, do not need merely to be disasters for us. They may be disasters, but there's more. They may also offer an unseen gift. They can provide the very pathway onto higher ground, to deeper faith, a richer relationship with God. For the valleys can take us into the very heart of reality, that if there's any hope, if there's any strength, if there are any real answers, it has to come from beyond myself. I'm at a place now in this valley where I am open to that. So when I was just a little boy, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this, but I was scared of the dark. And my mom used to tease me. I slept with the mummy effect. I put the sheet all the way over my head like this. And my bedroom was at the top of the stairs of this 2-bedroom house. And, be put to bed, the lights would go off, I'd get in the mummy position, I'd be scared. And then I might hear noise from downstairs. My dad's sudden laughter, my mom clattering dishes in the kitchen. I was like, well, I'm not alone. This dark room is not the only reality. Their lights are on in many other rooms, and I can hear their voices, and I can trust them because I know they love me. They're going to come to bed too. They're going to turn off the light, and then we're all going to awake in the morning. So I like what P.T. Forsyth once wrote. The depth is simply the height inverted. The depth is simply the height inverted. God is deeper than the deepest depth in man. So the cross of Jesus is the height inverted. And Jesus' resurrection that we celebrate today in this season is the definitive revelation that God is deeper than the deepest depths of man. Jesus is the Good Shepherd who leads his flock and speaks to us again today in this sad week through his word, through our prayers, through our communion, through our faith. Might we hear his voice again? Would you pray with me that we would hear his voice today all over again and trust where he leads the way, that goodness and mercy shall indeed follow us all the days of our life and beyond. Amen.